should ever take guns from law-abiding people?
I think that there should be an assault weapons ban. You are setting the conversation up to purposefully put me in a box.
I'm actually not. I think everyone watching, liberals and conservatives, would acknowledge that's a totally fair question.
I think the Supreme Court needs better justices who interpret the Second Amendment in the way it should be interpreted. This is one place where President Trump is right about the law.
I support the president that he is now. He's not the same person that he was 12 years ago. I'm not the same person I was 12 years ago.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged. An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Howdy, and welcome to this free-for-all Thursday edition of Focal Point on American Family Radio. I am your congenial, convivial, and amiable host, Brian Fisher. You are listening to Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio. We are glad to have you in the conversation, however that's happening, whether you're listening to us on one of our 184 stations that comprise the American Family Radio Network, whether you are using your app for the iPhone or the Android, listening to us on the go, whether you're catching us live streaming at Facebook or on YouTube. And don't forget, we record the program as we live stream it on Facebook. We upload it to the Facebook page as soon as the program is over, publish it with an extensive table of contents so you can find your way around the content of the program. And, of course, on YouTube, you got the same thing. And you may be audio streaming us. You go to afr.net, and the audio stream will automatically begin to play. You can listen to us through your computer. And also, we got the tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people every month that follow us on podcasts. It's another way you can keep track of the program and listen at your leisure.
And don't forget the Roku availability on the Cowger Network.
Yes, Cowger Network on Roku. I think that program airs in the evening.
Yes.
It's today's program, but it airs, I believe, at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock Central Time. So another option to be able to catch the programming. Now, this will be our last day of broadcasting this week. Tomorrow is Good Friday. We're going to take that off in honor of Good Friday. Hope you have a terrific Easter weekend, that you have an opportunity to spend time with your family, and that you have an opportunity to commemorate not only the death but the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Rich weekend in Christian tradition. Hope you'll take full advantage of that. Now, before we jump into some of that content, we want to take a moment to look at the Word of God. We're using a reading schedule that you can find at pray.afa.net, pray.afa.net. Find a passage there for every day. Look that passage up in your Bible, digital or hardcover, and read that passage. Mark up your Bible. That's why I encourage you to carry a Bible, a hard Bible, a tangible copy that you can mark up, make it your own it. But however you do it, read the passage for the day. Today it's Psalm 64 and 65, and then pray the prayer that you will find there back to God. Each prayer incorporates the very words of Scripture. Well, let's take a look at some of the content of Psalm 64 and 65, and then we will go to prayer. Psalm 64, David is writing this as a king, and people that are in positions of prominence and positions of leadership, doesn't have to be just political. It can be in ministry, it can be in business, it can be in public life in some way. You discover at some point that there's a whisper campaign that's been launched against you to try to create trouble for you, to sully your reputation, even to bring you down from your position. Have you fired? Have you replaced? Well, David experienced that same thing in his time as king. And here's what he says about that. Hear my voice, O God, in my complaint. Preserve my life from dread of the enemy. So it was serious enough in his case, in this situation, that they could endanger his very life with the words that they were speaking. He says in verse 2, hide me from the secret plots of the wicked, from the throng of evildoers. So he knew that there were secret plots that were being hatched, whisper campaigns, behind the scenes, behind closed doors. He had a suspicion that these conversations were about him. Conversations would suddenly cease when he walked into the room. So it wasn't too hard to figure out that these people were talking about him behind his back, and what they were hatching was not good news for him. So he asked God to protect him. Look, I don't even know what these secret plots are about. You know, when people are speaking against you, you may not even have any idea what they're saying about you or who they're saying it to. But you have an idea that there's something that's swirling out there that's not going to be good for you. It's going to be damaging to your reputation and your effectiveness. And so you do what David did. Hide me from the secret plots of the wicked. Because, God, you know, you see everything. There's nothing that's concealed from your view. Everything is open and laid bare before the eyes of him with whom we have to do. So you can ask God to protect you. Even when you don't know what's going on, you can ask God to protect you. Hide me from the secret plots of the wicked. And particularly what was dangerous is they were using words like swords. So words like swords can slash, they can cut, they can wound, they can pierce to the heart, and that's what David was up against. Hide me from the secret plots of the wicked who whet their tongues like swords, who aim bitter words like arrows, shooting from ambush at the blameless, shooting at him suddenly and without fear. So they shoot from ambush. In other words, he doesn't see it coming. They're kind of lying in wait for him, and all of a sudden, boom, out of nowhere comes this accusation. They hold fast to their evil purpose. They talk of laying snares secretly, thinking, who can see them? They search out injustice, saying, we have accomplished a diligent search, for the inward mind and heart of a man are deep. But, David says, this is where my dependence is. God shoots his arrows at them. They are wounded suddenly. They are brought to ruin with their own tongues turned against them. All who see them will wag their heads. Then all mankind fears. They tell what God has brought about and ponder what he has done. Let the righteous one rejoice in the Lord and take refuge in him. Let all the upright in heart exult. You know, in this business here where David says, look, they are going to be caught by their own tongues. Their own tongues, their own words are going to be turned against them. And you look at what's happening even right now. I got a couple of stories in the stack about this Russian investigation against Donald Trump for colluding with Russia. And again, you have Peter Strzok, you have Lisa Page, you have Andrew McCabe. And remember, they were engaging in a whole bunch of secret text exchanges that nobody knew about. They thought nobody was going to find. And yet those text messages have surfaced. And they revealed their plot. They were using their tongues, or in this case, text messages, to plot against the President of the United States. They have come to surface. They've come to light. And it could wind up being bad trouble for them, as their words may be turning back on them. Now, let me just read a little bit out of Psalm 65. Praise is due to you, O God in Zion, and to you shall vows be performed. O you who hears prayer, to you shall all flesh come. Now catch this. When iniquities prevail against me, you atone for our transgressions. You know, sometimes we can be actually overwhelmed with guilt and with shame because of our sins. Our sins, our own transgressions, prevail against us. We get smothered by these things. Our consciences accuse us. We feel guilt. We don't know how to shake it. We don't know how to get rid of it. And David says, here is the good news. God is the one who will atone for our transgressions. We can't. There's no sacrifice that we can offer that will atone for our transgressions. But God has made the perfect sacrifice in Christ. That's what this weekend is really all about. That's what we celebrate tomorrow. The perfect atoning sacrifice was offered by Christ. Well, let's turn our attention to God and let's pray to him. Praise awaits you, O God our Savior. You hear the prayers of men, and to you all men will come. You answer our prayers with awesome deeds of righteousness. You armed yourself with strength and formed the mountains by your power. You still the roaring of the seas, the roaring of the waves, and you still the turmoil of the nations. When we were overwhelmed by sins, you atoned for our transgressions through the shed blood of Christ. I pray this day that you will protect my life, the lives of the listening audience of Focal Point, American Family Radio, the lives of my family, the lives of their families, their communities, their mayors, their governors, their states, and our president, that you will protect our lives from the threat of the enemy, whether the enemy is man or Satan. I pray that you will hide us from those who would speak hurtful and harmful things against us when we are innocent of their accusations. May all the upright in heart praise you. Amen.
Hi, I'm Jan Harper. If you're a pastor's wife like me, you probably know what it feels like to live in a fishbowl. You know, that feeling like everybody is watching your every move?
The annual AFA Pastor and Wife Fishbowl Retreat is 3 days and 2 nights of relaxation and building relationships. The retreat is hosted by Pastor Bert Harper of Exploring the Word and his wife Jan. Special guest speakers will include AFR morning personality J.J. Jasper and his wife Melanie. The AFA Fishbowl Retreat is set for October 9 through 11 at the Linden Valley Conference Center in Linden, Tennessee. Call 800-326-4543 extension 300 for registration and information. That's 800-326-4543 extension 300. Or visit repairingthefoundations.net. Registration is limited to the first 35 couples.
Get out of the fishbowl and into the AFA Pastor and Wife Fishbowl Retreat. We'll see you there.
Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Corner. Since 1977, the American Family Association has been a voice to remind America that the blessings of our nation have come from God's gracious hand as we've trusted Him. We thank God for His grace, empowering us for 40 years of service. As we worship Him for that, our heart's cry is for our Lord to grace us to be His vessels for the next 40 years.
Visit the Hamilton Corner on the podcast page at afr.net for more from Abraham Hamilton III, Public Policy Analyst for the American Family Association.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Hi, and welcome back to Free for All Friday on Thursday. Brian Fisher is my name. You listen to Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on Conservative Talk Radio. We're glad to have you in the conversation. We're honored to have a special guest in our Focal Point studio today, Jeremy Dys. He is the Deputy General Counsel for First Liberty. He's the host of First Liberty Briefing. First Liberty, that's the legal organization that's headed up by Kelly Shackelford, who's been a frequent guest on this program. These guys are doing fantastic work, ladies and gentlemen, on defense of religious liberty, which is our first liberty. You know, when the founders got about the business of defining what rights we need particular protection from the central government from, they started with religious liberty. So Jeremy Dys is my guest. Welcome, Jeremy. Great to have you here.
Oh, so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, I got to ask you a constitutional question first. And this is just kind of a theoretical question because I realize we're a long ways from following the Constitution as the founders wrote it. But one of the points I've made to our listening audience, if you look at the First Amendment, the way it is written, the first word in the First Amendment is Congress. Congress shall make no law. So if we were, and you know, it's been trashed by the incorporation doctrine and all that stuff, which I find no basis for in the Constitution. But if we were following the Constitution as the founders gave it to us, that's what I want you to comment on. It seems to me like only Congress could violate the First Amendment because that's the only entity that is restrained by the First Amendment, by the Constitution. And the only way they could violate the First Amendment was if they passed a law picking one denomination and making it the official church of the United States, or if Congress or the federal government in general prohibited the free exercise of religion, which they do all the time. The cases we're going to talk about, that's the federal government, the judicial branch in this case, interfering with the free exercise of religion. Am I anywhere close to being, if we were in theory operating in a perfect world, is that anywhere close?
You're getting close. What the First Amendment is intended to do is in fact, the reason it starts with Congress shall make no law is because the rest of the Constitution up to that point, it's almost like there's a dividing line, right, between the last article of the Constitution and the beginning of the Bill of Rights. And don't forget the Bill of Rights was essential to the passage or the adoption, the confirmation of the actual Constitution itself. You had to have that there or else there would be no Constitution. The states would not ratify it. And so the Constitution, it starts out with what? We the people in order to form a more perfect union. And then they lie out all these things. That followed, of course, the Declaration of Independence. And all these things are meant to be read together. So the Declaration of Independence is set out to say, hey, look, these rights are given to us, you and I individually, not by government, but by God itself, but by God himself. And so government really can't take them, but we do need a government. So what's that going to look like? Well, then we're going to form a more perfect union. How do we do that? We take some of the rights that we possess individually, and we give them in part to the government to be able to do things like lay a navy in or settle taxes. As much as we hate that kind of thing, I can't get taxes from you. They call that stealing. So we had to have some sort of central government to make that happen. But then it ends, and it says Congress shall make no law. And so what happens from that point on, it's as if the American people are saying, we gave you some limited rights with which to operate a government, but we didn't give you this one. And what's the first one they say we didn't give you? The right to pursue our religion, to freely exercise our religious beliefs. In fact, we're going to underscore that, like putting two double lines underneath this First Amendment language. First, we have the right to freely exercise our faith, but more than that, Congress shall make no law to establish a religion. So you can't tell me where I have to go to church. Now, that has become very much convoluted over the course of the last couple decades, or really the last couple half century or so, especially. But the bottom line is this, that the government itself is supposed to be allowing people to pursue their religious beliefs, whether that's in the schools, whether that's in the military, in the public square in general, or within our houses of worship. We're supposed to be free to be able to freely exercise our faith, and the government's not supposed to be telling us where we can or cannot go to church or our house of worship.
Well, let's look at some cases that you guys are working on at First Liberty. And again, this is what I love the work that you guys do, because religious liberty is probably the constitutional issue that's nearest and dearest to my heart. And we followed this case of Joe Kennedy, the coach in Washington, and he just went on the field after the games and just had a quiet prayer by himself at midfield, thanking God for the privilege of coaching these young men. They started asking, what are you doing out there, Coach? Well, I'm out there praying. Well, can we join you? He said, well, it's a free country. Come on out. So they came out and started joining him. Wasn't long before members of other teams saw what they were doing, wanted to join them. And then some nattering nabob of negativism got involved and said, you can't do that. That's unconstitutional. That violates the Establishment Clause. So you guys are involved in this. Where is that at in the pipeline?
It's funny because you actually got the facts slightly wrong, but let me make the correction. The nattering nabob actually was not the correct part. That's the normal way that things happen, but it actually started with a compliment. Someone from the community said, this is great that Coach Kennedy's doing this. I wish more people did that. And the nabob in this situation happened to be the school district, who took it upon themselves to tell Coach Kennedy to stop doing these things. And there were some things that he needed to kind of corral and get kind of more streamlined, and he's perfectly willing to make sure he's abiding by the law. He wants to make sure that he's doing that. But what the bridge that was too far for Coach Kennedy was to say, look, just let me go to the 50-yard line, take a knee, and say a 30, maybe 15-second silent prayer to myself. And they said no. And they actually said, we know what you're doing when you do that. In other words, they didn't think he was like picking up his contact that he dropped on the ground. They knew that he was praying. And because the fans could see him and all this kind of stuff, then he had to stop that. Well, we said that's not right, and he's got the freedom to be able to do that. That shouldn't be an issue. And so we filed a lawsuit against Bremerton Washington School District. Soon after that, the district court in Washington State there upheld his termination and said that because he's associated with the school district and the kids know what he's doing, then he's under the control of the district and violating the Establishment Clause. So we took that to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And the Ninth Circuit also agreed with that, saying, look, if he's basically wearing his paraphernalia that says he's a coach, if the kids know that he's a coach, then he's subject to this limitation. Well, here's the danger of that decision and why we continue to fight this, and we'll be appealing this case to the Supreme Court of the United States. It's so broadly worded that if someone were to wear a cross around their neck as a teacher at school, that teacher is subject to discipline and termination. If a teacher were to wear her hijab or a yarmulke, if a gentleman was to wear his yarmulke to class, they would be subject to termination. The rule, in fact, is so broad, as the Ninth Circuit has issued it right now, that if a teacher were to say grace by herself silently over her food in the lunchroom, and students could see her do it, she could face termination as well. That's not the America that we were promised with religious liberty in here. And so Coach Kennedy, who would call himself an average Joe, is just simply saying, look, I want the right to be able to take a knee for 15, maybe 30 seconds and say a silent prayer. Certainly the Constitution affords him the freedom to do that.
I remember there was a case, I believe in Kentucky, they tried to pass a moment of silence, and some court struck that down. Same reason. We know what you're doing in that moment of silence. We know the thoughts that are going through your brain.
Yeah, it's almost as if the government wants these coaches to, if the students start to pray, to plug their ears and run screaming from the field lest they be associated with it in some manner.
Well, and if you're going to be penalized or punished for the thoughts that they think you are thinking, not even your speech, then all of a sudden we have the thought police out there. Our government now is policing our thoughts, not just our words. Well, so the Ninth Circuit Court, that result was probably pretty predictable, and so you're going to appeal this to the Supreme Court. Let me ask you this. I got one or two other cases I want to touch on briefly with you, but we saw with the addition of Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court, it might have made a huge difference in that Missouri case. It was a religious expression case on a playground with playground equipment, and this school was denied access to the funds that were available to every other preschool because they were a religious preschool. And with Neil Gorsuch's involvement, that was overturned, and they're now allowed to participate equally with other schools. How much of a difference do you think it's going to make when we come to religious liberty cases that Neil Gorsuch is on the court now?
Well, I think it's very important. In fact, you can go to firstliberty.org and learn more about our involvement with the judges in this situation. The Supreme Court is one thing, but don't forget about the hundreds of other judges that are around the country as well. At the Supreme Court, Justice Gorsuch filled the seat of Justice Scalia, so it's kind of a one-for-one exchange. We think Justice Gorsuch seems to be doing the right thing, and I think will ably fill the huge shoes that Justice Scalia left on the bench. But there are many, many judges out there. Remember, the Supreme Court of the United States takes about 70 or 80 cases a year. There are over 500,000 cases filed every year in district courts. And of those district courts, to the courts of appeal then, there are about 40 to 50,000 cases appealed there. So more than likely, your chances of going to the Supreme Court of the United States are exceptionally small. In fact, it's very difficult to expect a Supreme Court argument at any time in your lifetime, let alone litigator's time. But it is very likely that your legal rights, your civil rights, your First Amendment rights are going to be held or heard at the district courts and at the courts of appeal. And so while we've done good things to make sure Justice Gorsuch is there, we still have Senate Democrats in particular that are holding up the confirmation of many good candidates or good nominees for office, including my friend at First Liberty, Matthew Kaczmarek, who's been nominated to a federal bench in Amarillo, Texas.
And Democrats are just cobbing that up with this 30-hour debate rule and all that kind of stuff. So President Trump is sending good nominees to the Senate for confirmation, and they just will cob the system up so he can't get hearings on these.
Yeah, and it goes beyond judges even. So you've got judges certainly that are being held up, but you also got things like there's no general counsel for the Air Force right now. That's an appointed position, and the Senate is holding those things somewhat hostage right now. I hope that they'll get along and move these things forward here very quickly, but until then, we're waiting along.
Two other cases. We got about 2 minutes left talking here with Jeremy Dys, Deputy General Counsel for First Liberty, doing great work on First Amendment issues, religious liberty. Two other cases, you'll need to take these kind of together and comment. One is Bladensburg. This is a military cross. It's a memorial for fallen soldiers. That's before the Fourth Circuit. And then there are a couple of legislative prayer cases that you guys are handling. The
Bladensburg World War I Veterans Memorial is better described as a gravestone to 49 men who died in World War I defending freedom on behalf of the citizens of Prince George's County, Maryland. And that was erected. It was started by Gold Star moms who had lost their sons in battle defending our freedoms that we know today. And it was ultimately finished by the American Legion, who are our clients in this case. The American Legion erected this monument. It's a Celtic cross. It was a grave marker that was popular during that time, and it was world known as a grave marker. They erected that monument there on American Legion property at the end of the National Defense Highway, which is itself a World War I memorial. And so that was dedicated to their memory. And things grew around there, and so they had to expand the highway. They took the property through eminent domain, but the American Legion retained an interest in that. And so they were going to tear it down, but there was such a fit about it at that time, in the 1960s, that they left it standing in the center of the highway. And there it has stood for about 95 years, bothering no one but as a testimony to the courage and freedom that these men fought for so long ago during World War I. And suddenly about, I think it was 2014 or 15, someone finally became offended and filed a lawsuit at it. Now, you and I are told that if we see pornography on a billboard, we're supposed to turn our eyes, but this is too much for someone with this memorial cross.
Yeah. And, and we'll have to pick up that Rowan County legislative prayer next time we have you on the program, and I hope there will be another time, Jeremy. But, if we try to file a lawsuit saying, hey, I'm offended, I mean, they're allowed to make that a ground of appeal. I'm offended, and therefore I'm going to accuse you of violating some law or some constitutional principle. We can't ever seem to get away with that. So, my guest has been Jeremy Dys, Deputy General Counsel for First Liberty, and Jeremy, I do hope we'll have you back on again. I appreciate so much the work that you guys do there. God bless you and keep up the great work.
Thanks so much. Always glad to be here.
Okay. Thank you, Jeremy, very much. Well, that's it for this segment. We'll be right back in just 2 minutes with more content. You're listening to Focal Point on American Family Radio, free for all Thursday. Back in 2 minutes.
This is Dr. Richard Lamb, president of Southern Evangelical Seminary. Welcome to Bringing Every Thought Captive. For Christians, there is no more sacred time than Holy Week, starting with Palm Sunday, then Good Friday, and then the glorious Resurrection Day. As the wonderful hymn proclaims it, up from the grave he arose, with a mighty triumph o'er his foes. He arose a victor from the dark domain, and he lives forever with his saints to reign. He arose, hallelujah, Christ arose. But before the glory of the resurrection and the empty tomb, there was the agony of the cross. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son to die a cross kind of death, so that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have eternal life. My favorite hymn, written by Charles Wesley, proclaims the glories of God's love and grace. And can it be that I should gain an interest in the Savior's blood? Died he for me, who caused his pain, for me, who him to death pursued? Amazing love, how can it be that thou, my God, shouldst die for me? He left his Father's throne above, so free, so infinite his grace, emptied himself of all but love, and bled for Adam's hapless race. 'Tis mercy all, immense and free, for, O my God, it found out me. No condemnation now I dread. Jesus and all in him is mine. Alive in him, my living head, and clothed in righteousness divine. Bold I approach the eternal throne, and claim the crown through Christ my own. Amazing love, how can it be that thou, my God, shouldst die for me? That's the message of Easter. A love that was willing to come and die on the cross, that we might be liberated from sin and condemnation and be resurrected to newness of life. This is Richard Land.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher
on American Family Radio.
Listen to the audio podcast or download today's program at afr.net. You can also read Brian Fisher's columns at afa.net.
You know what? I forgot to print out the rundown.
Okay.
And one of you guys getting me a rundown, my bad. I just completely spaced it. Forgot to do it. Got busy doing other things, and so I do not have my rundown unless the sound bites we want to use, so I'll have to trust my trusty, rusty staff to...
Your name is Brian Fisher, and this is Focal Point.
Brian Fisher, yes. Program is Focal Point.
I wonder what show we were listening to.
Yeah. So, all right. Just to give you a quick heads up, a programming note, we're going to have a special program at 2:30 today on the 7 last words of Jesus. That'll be on, well, is that today? Is that going to be today or tomorrow? That's tomorrow. Okay, that'll be tomorrow. My bad. It'll be tomorrow on this time slot. Focal Point at 2:30 tomorrow. We'll have Stu Epperson talking about the last words of Jesus before his crucifixion and his death. What were the last words of Jesus? What do they mean for us today? These words, the last words of Jesus, and we've said it before, last words are lasting words. These words tower above the other words in the New Testament because of who he was. So Stu Epperson, who is the author of the book, The Last Words of Jesus, shares some insight from those sacred words of Jesus. That'll be tomorrow at 2:30. Also, have some other special program coming up this weekend. Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir, we're going to feature them with Pastor Simbala on Good Friday at 10 a.m. That'll be tomorrow at 10 a.m. Easter Sunday at 3 p.m. All times are Central, by the way. So Friday, 10 a.m. Central, and Sunday afternoon, 3 p.m. Central. You can hear, that's 10 a.m. Central on Friday, the Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir. Then Ray Pritchard of Keep Believing Ministries and a frequent co-host of Today's Issues. Tomorrow, Good Friday at 11 a.m. Central, will be talking on the theme Paid in Full, Reflections on the Finished Work of Christ at Calvary, Remarkable Reason Behind It. And then on Good Friday at 3 p.m. and Easter Sunday at 2 p.m., we'll have the Crucifixion. This is a special program that highlights the songs of Fernando Ortega, gifted singer and songwriter, and the Easter thoughts of Bert Harper, our own Bert Harper, who hosts Exploring the Word right here Monday through Friday on Focal Point. So those are some notes about the programming that will be coming up. I want to mention this too. In fact, get something out. Open your cell phone to enter this number or grab a Post-it and write this number down for listener testimonies. The number to write down is 877-876-8890. Is that right? 8890, correct? 8890. 8840. I'm just completely messed up today. Ignore everything I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen. It is 888. No. Forget all that. Forget that. So we're going to start all over here. Forget everything I've said. I'm going to give you the listener line for American Family Radio listener stories. This is if you want to call in and share with us how AFR or Focal Point, either one, has impacted you positively. And that number is 877-876-8893. That's the only number you need to remember right now, 877-876-8893. Love to have you call that number. You'll be able to record your story about the impact that Focal Point or American Family Radio has had in your life, how we've been able to motivate you to become involved in the culture war, instructed you, mobilized you, educated you. Maybe you've got a specific story about how AFR or Focal Point has impacted you in a particularly meaningful way, why AFR and Focal Point is important to you and to your family, and how has God used AFR or Focal Point in your life or in your family's life. So again, that number, write it down. Was that what you were going to remember?
I was going to say, just file all those other numbers on Hillary's hard drive, and the only one to really remember. Can I do it? I'd like to give the number.
Sure.
Okay.
Do it.
8893. I had my one shot.
Okay, that's the last time, Jeff. That's the last time I'll let you. I mean, I can mess up these numbers all by myself. I don't need my producer helping me to do it. So here's a second chance.
Can I give a number?
Yeah, we're gonna give Jeff an opportunity to redeem himself because that's what Easter weekend is all about, redemption.
877-876-8893.
Okay, that's for listener testimonies. Rob, you want to give the number?
No, I'm good.
Okay, all right. 877-876-8893. Call that number right now. You can have a chance to leave your listener story with us before the end of this segment. Now, want to talk a little bit about the Second Amendment. We were talking about the Constitution earlier, and a fair amount of discussion in the media in the wake of the Parkland shooting and all that. Now, let's review the actual wording of the Second Amendment just for a moment so we know exactly what the words are. We'll kind of break it down, know exactly what the words of the Second Amendment are, and then we're going to listen to a couple of people talk about what they think it's about. But listen very carefully to the actual words of the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So the purpose of the Second Amendment is to make sure that the states could field a militia. How did they do that? Is by guaranteeing to every American citizen the right to keep and bear arms. Notice that the right to arms does not belong to the militia. It belongs to the American people. Couldn't be any clearer. It is the right of the people to keep and bear arms. So you have an armed citizenry. They all got arms so that if a local government or if a state government needs to form a militia, they have an armed populace and they can call them for training, they can organize them, they can prepare them to defend the state. This is talking about protecting the security of a free state. Now, who would they be looking for protection from? Well, one of the things they'd be looking for protection from would be an overweening federal government. Federal government in the Constitution has the authority to raise a military defense. And in order to make sure that that government doesn't overreach and start using its military resources against its own people, the Constitution guarantees that each of the states will be able to form their own militia or militias to protect their own security and their own freedom. So again, let's remember, it's not the right of the militia to keep and bear arms. The militia has the right to keep and bear arms because everybody that's in it does. That's the important point. It's like with churches. You know, the right to the free exercise of religion does not belong to churches. It belongs to you and to me as citizens of the United States of America. So our churches have religious liberty, not because the churches have it, but because everybody that goes to the church has the right to the free exercise of religion. Therefore, the churches that they comprise have that same right. But it's an individual right, and because they each individually have the right, then their church has the right to the free exercise of religious liberty. So with that as a backdrop, I want you to listen to two sound bites and see if you can evaluate the problem with these things. First, let's start with noted constitutional scholar Larry King. You know, I have no idea how old this guy is. I mean, it's amazing to me. This guy has looked 98 years old for the last 30 years, and he just keeps humming right along. But anyway, TMZ, the entertainment people, catch up with Larry King outside a restaurant, and they ask him about the Second Amendment, and here's Larry King's take on it.
Started, eventually they won in other areas, but Southern senators started it so they could repel slave uprisings.
All right, there's Larry King. That's his explanation for the Second Amendment. It was started by Southern senators so they could ward off slave uprisings. Now, there isn't anything that could be further from the truth than that. You know, there was a possibility that they might have wanted to provide states to have militias to protect themselves from hostile Indian nations, hostile Native American nations that were around them because they were hostile. Remember, that's why in the colony of Virginia back in the day, back in the 16 and 1700s, there was a law. In fact, there was a law in a number of the colonies that you had to pack heat to church because what the hostile Native American nations discovered is if you wanted to attack the settlers, you want to attack the American settlers, the time to hit them, 11 o'clock on Sunday morning. They're all together in one place, and they're unarmed. Nobody was thinking about packing arms to church. It was a time of worship and prayer and hymn singing. So that's when the hostile Native American peoples would strike. So they even passed laws. You've got to pack heat to church because in case they hit us at 11 o'clock, we've got to be prepared to defend ourselves. So the purpose was for the security of a free state. Wasn't it? Nothing in there about slave uprisings, and protect the security of a free state from external threats. Could even be from our federal government. Could be from hostile Indian tribes in the neighborhood. So Larry King strikes out as a constitutional scholar. Now here is Representative Steve Cohen from Tennessee, a Democrat, talking with Wolf Blitzer about what he believes the Second Amendment is all about.
So no, I think the Supreme Court needs better justices who interpret the Second Amendment in the way it should be interpreted, which is kind of what Justice Stevens says. It was for a well-regulated militia, but it won't be repealed, and it's a political issue. This is one place where President Trump is right about the law.
So he's saying President Trump is right about the law, that this thing is never going to be repealed, but Representative Cohen is arguing that the Second Amendment is all about the militia. It enshrines the right to form militias. No, it doesn't. It enshrines the right to keep and bear arms. Why do you want every citizen in your state, in your country, to have the right to keep and bear arms so that if the occasion arises, you can form a militia for your own defense? Now remember, militias were used in American history prior to 1776, prior to the formation of the Constitution in 1789, and it was largely to defend themselves against the imperial power of the British Crown. So they knew what it was the militias that gathered at Lexington and Concord to engage British troops. It was the militias that gathered in Salem when the British troops were coming to try to take their guns from them, their cannons that they were turning into field weapons. It was the militias were there to protect Salem, protect the surrounding communities. So it was not to enshrine the right to have a militia. That was understood. It was the right to keep and bear arms so that you could form a militia. Your state could if it was necessary. So again, let's never forget that as the Supreme Court said in 2008 in the Heller decision, the Second Amendment protects the individual right to keep and bear arms. Give us a call next segment, 888-589-8840, 888-589-8840.
All of chapter 4 through 19 has to do with what God is going to do when he pours out his wrath upon the earth. The church won't be here. The church will be in heaven. How do we know that? We just looked in through the door and the church is up there already.
Join Dr. David Jeremiah for his series Escape the Coming Night, next time on Turning Point.
5:30 a.m. and 7 p.m. Central on American Family Radio.
This is Steve Conover inviting you to listen to the Friends of Israel Today each week on this station. Here's our host and Bible teacher, Chris Katulka.
Hey everybody, the Friends of Israel Today is a unique radio show that teaches biblical truth for changing times. We do this through Q&A, timely interviews, dramatic readings from the life of Holocaust survivor Zvi Kalisher, and of course, Bible teaching.
To learn more, visit foiradio.org.
Join us for Friends of Israel Today, Sunday morning at 11:30 Central on American Family Radio.
Are you personally offended by foul language on television? Even well-written, well-acted programming may be riddled with profanity and undesirable dialogue. The TV Guardian app is technology that mutes and replaces profanity, sexual references, and sacrilegious language from television programs and movies. You see, programmers are required to provide closed captioning. TV Guardian uses the closed caption to look ahead, find the offensive language, mute it, and replace the phrasing in the caption. Users of the TV Guardian app can set the filters for their family's needs, using strict, moderate, or tolerant settings, with or without filtering for religious or sexual references. The TV Guardian app is now providing profanity-free programming. Information is available at tvguardian.com/dish. tvguardian.com/dish.
American Family Radio is thankful for the support of TV Guardian.
American Family Radio.
You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Brian Fisher.
Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point, American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. Got one more soundbite to play before we go to the phones, but we'll go to the phones right after. The number to call if you want to enter the conversation is 888-589-8840. 888-589-8840 is the number to call. One more Second Amendment clip, and this is a bit of an exchange between Tucker Carlson and Jennifer Palmieri, who was a former spokesman for the Clinton administration. And they get into a little bit of a back and forth here on the whole idea of the purpose of the Second Amendment. Let's listen.
Do you think the government should ever take guns from law-abiding people? That's not a trick question. It's a sincere question.
I think that there should be an assault weapons ban. I don't think that people need to take their guns away, but I think there should be an assault weapons ban.
But people who own the guns,
you are setting the conversation up to purposefully put me in a box.
I'm actually
that
not.
Is not. We don't need to. That we don't.
Why?
That we
These
don't
are
need to
absolute.
have.
I think everyone watching, liberals and conservatives, would acknowledge that's a totally fair question. Why isn't that not a fair question? Because you don't want to answer it? I don't understand.
No, because it is not. It's not a sincere question.
It is very much a sincere question. It is, as a gun owner, I can promise you, I couldn't tell you how sincere it is.
My husband has a number of guns too.
That's great. But even if I didn't, should government ever take the guns of people who have not misused them?
I think we've addressed it.
And you don't think it should?
Move on.
You don't think it should? You don't want to answer
on your list of questions that are designed to set me up.
You know, she said we've already addressed it. Well, no, you haven't, Jennifer Palmer. You never answered this question. You know, and Tucker Carlson's exactly right. That's a perfectly legitimate question. People that want to amend the Second Amendment, they want to restrict it. They want to restrict gun ownership. The question then at some point has to be faced, what about people that already have guns, that already own guns? If you're going to tighten the restrictions in the Second Amendment in some way or another, are you going to start taking guns away from the American people that haven't misused them? That's one thing if you take guns away from somebody who's committed a felony with it. Everybody agrees that you can forfeit your constitutional right to keep and bear arms if you misuse a gun. You use a gun to commit a felony, yeah, we're going to take that away from you, and you're not going to have the constitutional right to own one again. But you forfeit it by your own criminal behavior. But what about someone who's never misused a gun, never used it to commit a crime, and she will not answer the question? Which tells you that in reality she is in favor of the confiscation of guns. She really does not believe that the American people can be trusted with guns. And she's talking about a ban on assault rifles. Assault rifle is just basically a hunting gun. It's just you guys use it for hunting. It looks dangerous. It looks like a military weapon, but it isn't. It's just semi-automatic, just like a regular rifle would be that uses some kind of a magazine. That's all it is. Nothing, no more, no less. It just has some different costuming on the externals. Okay, let's go to the phones, get take on it, talk about Second Amendment or religious liberty here in this segment. Dwight in Tuscaloosa, what's on your mind? Dwight, talk to me.
Hey, first-time caller, long-time listener. Just thank you for your show. I really enjoy it. I work for FedEx, so I have a lot of time to listen to it. So I want to talk about the Second Amendment. There's a movie that made millions and millions and millions of dollars, and it's called The Hunger Games. And they start out, they took weapons away from their people, and they oppressed them, and they had no rights. They couldn't defend themselves. And it's just a movie, and it's all fiction or nonfiction. And but it could happen to us. And I'm not putting anything by what they're doing up in Washington, D.C. in the swamp. But, that's my thought. Yeah. I'm a retired Army guy. I've been in the military, served 20 years, and, it could happen. Yeah. I'm not saying that the military would do it, but, it could come down the line.
Well, Dwight, you look at like Nazi Germany. When they wanted to control the people of Germany, the first thing they did was start confiscating their guns so that they didn't have any ability, any capacity to defend themselves when the stormtroopers came. They were helpless. They had no ability to defend themselves because they had been disarmed by their own government. And we've talked before about these totalitarian governments like in China and so forth, and Russia, where they killed literally millions and millions of people. And in every case, the slaughter of millions of their own citizens followed the disarming of their citizens. So tyrants know that's the first step. You've got to get the ability for self-defense out of the hands of your citizens if you're going to be able to take advantage of them and subdue them like that. All right, Dwight, listen, thank you very much for that. Thanks for listening. I'm glad you made it through. Great to have you in the listening audience out there. Let's grab a call from Retta in Seminole, Oklahoma. Retta, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hey, Brian, I got a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
We've already got a constitutional right to religion, right? So we get up every Sunday morning, we get in the car, and we go to church that we want. Well, we've got a constitutional right to bear arms also.
Right.
Well, it seems to me that the government's already started to overreach to a point because now we're required to get a concealed carry license. I mean, if it's our constitutional right, why can't we pick up our pistol, put it in our back pocket, and go where we want to go?
Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you something, Mary Jo. There are a number of states now, my home state of Idaho among them. I think it's about 11 that are up to constitutional carry now. Rob, do you know what the total is?
I'm not sure.
But it's called constitutional carry, where the only license that you need to carry a weapon, concealed or open, is the Second Amendment of the Constitution to the United States. So a lot of states are picking up on what you're saying, Mary Jo. This is something that is a constitutional right, and nobody has the right to interfere with that. Now, if you're in somebody's private property, that's one thing. They can decide what you get to bring onto their private property. That's different. You go to somebody's house and they want you to leave your gun at the door. You go into somebody's business, they want you to leave your gun at the door. That's one thing. They can do that. It's their own property. They can do that. But government's not allowed to do that on public places. All right, Mary Jo, thank you for that. It's a great call, great observation. Let's grab a call from, let's go to Mary Jo in Emporia, Virginia. Mary Jo in Emporia,
Hi.
Welcome. What's on your mind?
Hi, how are you? I just have a quick observation. I, too, have a license.
Uh-oh. I just lost Mary Jo. I'm sorry, Mary Jo. I accidentally hit the wrong button. I feel terrible about that. Hope you'll try to call us back, see if we can get you back on. I apologize. That's all on me. My bad. Let's grab a call from Kevin in Mississippi. Kevin, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hey, Brian. The liberals
they don't want to take all the guns away at one time. They just want to make a lot of noise and make it sound like, well, we'll just take the assault weapons, what they want to consider an assault weapon, and then that way everybody will be satisfied and they'll move on. But that's not what they're after. And the thing about liberals is, liberals and Muslims, they serve the same God, and the only difference between a liberal and a Muslim is the way you spell it.
Yeah. Well, and what Kevin's talking about is that there's a similar commitment among liberals and Muslims when it comes to issues of constitutional rights that we take for granted or we have granted to us in America. There, you go into a Muslim country and you have none of the First Amendment rights are protected in a Muslim country. You don't have the right to the free exercise of religion. And again, liberals are trying, I'm not saying that the liberals are as far gone as Muslims are on these kind of things, but they're in the same kind of general quadrant, where liberals want to restrict our ability to exercise the free exercise of religion like they're doing to Coach Joe Kennedy up in Washington. They don't even want him praying by himself silently in the middle of a football field after a game. Well, Muslims would do the same thing. If you're a Christian, they would not allow you to do the same thing. There's no, under Islamic thought, there's no right to the free assembly, the peaceable assembly. You assemble as Christians for a home church or a regular church, you can get busted up, thrown in jail, and worse in a Muslim country. So there's the same, and Kevin's point, the same kind of dynamic, the same kind of dark energy that feeds liberalism and progressivism is the same dark energy that feeds the Islamic faith. Maybe not as extreme yet in liberalism as it is in the Islamic faith, but heading in the same direction. And don't forget that the Muslims were buddy-buddy with Hitler in World War II. They loved what Hitler was doing because they were just as anti-Semitic as he was. All right, let's go to Andrew in Houston, Texas. Andrew in Houston, Texas, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hi, how's it going? I just wanted to make a comment referencing, I don't think they'll come for the guns right away and try to take it. I think they'll try to nickel and dime it a little bit at a time, because a lot of your military law enforcement are gun advocates and members of the NRA. The NRA is not one big scary group, but it's a bunch of us individuals. So I think they'll legislate it to death. I think they'll come after the ammo, they'll come after the weapons, and they won't take big, humongous hits, but they'll take away a little bit here at a time. And then another thing I like to caution is tying the Second Amendment to hunting. George Washington didn't cross the Delaware because the deer were coming. So we have to kind of keep an eye on that. The Second Amendment is there to, if someone was to come through your home and want to cause harm to you or your family, that you're able to protect yourself and your family.
Yeah.
Or if the government decides to go crazy eyes King George III, that you can actually, stand up to a tyrannical government. We can't legislate evil away, but what we can do is defend our country and our home.
That's very well put, Andrew, because I think you're right. I think the effort, they understand that the American people have a passion for the Second Amendment. They're passionate about the right to self-defense and self-protection. They understand that. So they know that they're going to have to do this a little slice, a little piece at a time. That's why Debbie Wasserman Schultz was out there this week saying we need to get background checks for people to buy ammo. So what are they doing? They're coming after our ammo. Debbie Wasserman Schultz wants to restrict our access to ammo. And then we had someone else the other day suggesting that we need to ban semi-automatic weapons. Well, that's virtually every pistol that's used in self-defense. Somebody says we got to ban assault weapons because they look mean, military style. Well, that's just taking away people's hunting rifles is what that is. So, again, it'll be incremental, just like Andrew's saying. Okay, last call of the hour. Jimmy in Ohio, got about 15 seconds, man. Got to hit me with your best shot.
Hi there, Brian. I agree with you. My carry permit, it was signed by we the people.
There you go. And there's a lot of states recognizing that. All you need to have the right to carry is a copy of the Constitution. That is your license to carry. Well, that's it for the first hour. We'll be back after the news. Stay with us. Focal Point, American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
1milliondads.com. Be strengthened as a Christian leader for your wife and children, your church, your community. We believe that missing fathers is what's wrong with this country. 1milliondads.com is where we can learn and grow together as men of the cross. 1milliondads.com. Lead, or others will.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio, a ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. There's going to be an internal look at the Justice Department and the warrants obtained to keep tabs on a Trump campaign aide before the election. John Decker has more.
Following requests from Congress and Attorney General Jeff Sessions, the Justice Department's Inspector General said that he will review potential Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act abuses by both the DOJ and the FBI. According to a statement, the review will examine compliance with legal requirements filed with the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court and will also review information that was known to the DOJ and the FBI at the time the applications were filed. A memo authored by House Republicans criticized how the FBI obtained a FISA warrant to monitor Carter Page, a foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign. At the White House, John Decker, Fox News.
Uber has reached a settlement with the family of an Arizona woman killed by one of the ride-hailing service's driverless cars. Jeff Manasso reports.
The family of Elaine Herzberg, who was hit and killed last week in Tempe by a self-driving Uber testing vehicle, say they've reached a settlement with the company. Though attorneys for Herzberg's husband and daughter tell Reuters the agreement is confidential, the settlement avoids a civil trial and continued PR nightmare for the ride-hailing company. Uber's self-driving tests are suspended while the company works with police and federal investigators to learn why the Uber vehicle and its backup driver failed to recognize and stop for a human.
A military chaplain endorsing agency supports President Trump's revised policy regarding transgenders in the military. Chad Groening has more.
President Trump's newly revised policy prevents individuals identifying as transgendered from serving in the U.S. military, except under very limited circumstances. The revised policy is the direct result of input by military and civilian leaders, as well as those who have been in combat. Retired Army Chaplain Phil Wright is executive director of the Chaplain Alliance for Religious Liberty, whose members endorse 2/3 of the 5,500 chaplains serving in the military.
We thought this was a step in the right direction. The military priority is to fight our nation's wars, defend our nation. It's not a social club. It's not for social engineering. It's not to reflect America. It is to put a force that can win at a moment's notice out there representing America.
But Wright says the policy does fall short, however, in that it doesn't address safety issues concerning biological males gaining access to female sleeping areas.
There's the possibility of them having to room with men transitioning to be women. They're not sure their safety is being taken into consideration. They're also hesitant to trust the command because they don't believe that their privacy is being considered in these decisions.
Wright says the revised policy doesn't cover how constitutionally protected religious beliefs will be accommodated when they come into conflict with this political agenda. I'm Chad Groening.
An anti-pornography and trafficking organization is hopeful retailers will take a cue from a major chain that has made a decision about Cosmopolitan magazine. Charlie Butts reports.
Walmart has announced plans to move the racy magazine away from its checkout aisles so families and children don't have to view its cover or contents. Haley Halverson of the National Center on Sexual Exploitation says that will impact all 5,000 Walmart stores in this country.
So this means that if someone wants to go to Walmart and intentionally seek out Cosmo, they can certainly go ahead and do that. It'll be moved in isolation to the magazine racks. But now families and individuals who are going through checkout just trying to get their groceries have one less drop of hypersexualized media that's bombarding them.
The publication entices young girls to buy the magazine by using pictures of former Disney stars on the cover.
And so this is the kind of material that really is not empowering, but actually is promoting and facilitating sexual objectification of women, and that's something that a lot of people just don't want to see when they're going about their everyday lives.
Halverson says the culture, on the other hand, should treat women and girls as valued and whole persons rather than sexual objects. The organization is hopeful Walmart's move will motivate other businesses to move the magazine away from checkout lanes. I'm Charlie Butts.
For American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh.
Women and men alike find themselves in despair after an abortion. Every woman who had an abortion was for a short time a mother, every man a father. But afterwards, they're all people in pain, anger, sadness, relationship problems. These often accompany an abortion. But there is hope. Call 866-482-LIFE. Your call is confidential, and you'll be talking with someone who has already been where you are and found the way out. 866-482-LIFE.
Attacking people for their basic nature is unhealthy, and it's wrong. Society is a zero-sum equation in which a man's gain is a woman's loss. Do you think the government should ever take guns from law-abiding people?
I think that there should be an assault weapons ban. You are setting the conversation up to purposefully put me in a box.
I'm actually not.
I
think everyone watching, liberals and conservatives, would acknowledge that's a totally fair question.
I think the Supreme Court needs better justices who interpret the Second Amendment in the way it should be interpreted. This is one place where President Trump is right about the law.
I support the president that he is now. He's not the same person that he was 12 years ago. I'm not the same person I was 12 years ago.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged. An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Hi, and welcome to Free for All Friday on Thursday. This will be our last day of live broadcasting this week. Brian Fisher is my name, program Focal Point, Network American Family Radio. It's great to have you in the conversation today. Just a couple little items on the Second Amendment to kind of close the loop on that. Looking at a result of a survey by the Washington Post. They did a poll that indicated that 1/5 of the American people, 21% of the American people, support the idea of a repeal. Now that's scary enough by itself. But check out, you get into the internals of this poll, and here's what you discover. When you break it down by political party, 8% of Republicans support a repeal of the Second Amendment, which means you have no right to own a gun. But 39% of Democrats are in favor of it. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a spooky statistic. 39% of Democrats in the United States of America want to strip you of your right to own a gun. They want to repeal the Second Amendment. So, realize what that means. I mean, we're going to have an election in November, and every Democrat that is elected to office is going to have a constituency roughly of 39% that want him to support the repeal of the Second Amendment. So not that we should be a one-issue voter on the Second Amendment like we are and can be and should be on abortion, but we may not be that far away. Here's another poll on the immigration issue. 78%, they did a survey of all 28 nations in the European Union, all 28 of them, and they found that 78% of the people that live in the European Union, they want unchecked immigration stopped. Extraordinary unanimity, said one observer, around the question of immigration. They want tighter control of their borders. 78% of all Europeans believe that illegal immigration into their countries is a problem. And more citizens in every single European country say that it is a serious problem than that it is not a problem at all. So, the Europeans are living the nightmare on this because their governments in Sweden, governments in Germany, governments in France, governments in the UK, they virtually opened their borders to Muslim migrants, and now they are reaping the whirlwind. Sweden, now the rape capital of the world, and they've got no-go zones now in Sweden, where the largest mall in Sweden now. The largest mall in Sweden is a no-go area for everybody but Muslims, because the Muslim gangs have virtually taken the place over. So when they say we want tighter control of the borders, they are speaking not just from theory, but from experience. Now, one of the other, we talked about this earlier this week, about the whole issue of abortion and Disney princesses. In fact, we had a story that we talked about where somebody said what we need, in fact, this is a Planned Parenthood tweet, they deleted it because they got such blowback, that we need a Disney princess who's had an abortion. Well, it turns out that there is a Disney princess who did have an abortion, and she stepped forward to talk about her experience. Jeff, you got some information on that.
Yeah, this young lady worked for Disney in 1981. She sang and performed 5 shows a day as Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty. At the age of 18, she became pregnant and had an abortion to keep her job. And she said there was no pressure from company or management to abort my baby. I just didn't tell them. But I made a decision on my own, and I quickly lived to regret it. In the immediate days following my abortion, I struggled deeply. I continued to sing songs in front of the castle about dreams coming true, and eventually had to quit my dream job due to my inability to reconcile my decision with myself. I wanted to die.
Wow.
Eventually, I found healing, and it was a struggle to navigate my personal grief, but by the grace of God, I have an amazing life now.
Wow. So there's a Disney princess. This is exactly what Planned Parenthood is asking for. We need a Disney princess who's had an abortion. Well, you've got one, and she regrets it to this very day. I've got a column up at afa.net, and I want to talk a little bit about it. Encourage you to go there and read it. It's kind of my Easter column for this year. And very simply, the title of my column is Why I Am a Christian. And so I want to tell you, I may need to go into the next segment a little bit with this content, but I want to tell you in these next few minutes why I am a Christian. And I remember Bertrand Russell wrote a book called Why I Am Not a Christian. That was one of the first books I had to read as a philosophy major when I went to college at Stanford. The philosophy professor had us read that one, Why I Am Not a Christian. Well, the title of my little article is Why I Am a Christian. And I want to tell you, I am a Christian for one reason. And that reason is the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. You know, there is simply no credible alternative to the view that the grave was empty on Easter morning because of his bodily resurrection. His body wasn't there because he wasn't there. And he wasn't there because he had been raised from death to life. Now, there's no other theory that makes any kind of rational sense. I mean, some people say, well, the disciples stole the body. But listen to this. If the disciples had stolen the body, then they would know that any public story that he had been raised from the dead was a lie. Now, ladies and gentlemen, people will die for a lie that they believe to be true. Think of how many people martyr themselves for Allah. It's a complete lie and falsehood that they're buying. But they'll die for a lie that they believe to be true. But nobody will die for a lie that they know is a lie. Now, 11 of the 12 apostles died a martyr's death. John died in exile, which is a powerful confirmation that they knew beyond any shadow of doubt that Christ indeed had risen physically from the dead. They knew that the gospel was true. They knew that the message about Christ was true. You know, Chuck Colson once made the point, as a profound point, I've never forgotten it, that what convinced him of the reality of the resurrection was Watergate. Remember, Watergate was the scandal surrounded Dick Nixon, President Nixon, third-rate burglary break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters in the Watergate apartment complex, and it led to President Nixon resigning in disgrace before he got impeached. And what Chuck Colson said, the reason that Watergate convinced me of the resurrection is that we had roughly a dozen very highly gifted, highly educated, highly accomplished, and highly motivated, highly intelligent men, highly motivated, because if they failed in this cover-up, that means they're going to prison. And these 12 men no matter how motivated and gifted they were, how many resources they had at their disposal, they could not conceal the truth about Watergate for even a few months. And once that story began to unravel, it unraveled quickly, and a bunch of people wound up behind bars. And that's Colson's way of saying, look, if such a group of men could not perpetuate a lie to cover up a third-rate burglary, how could we expect the chances of unsophisticated fishermen covering up the greatest hoax in human history? Not likely.
Here's Twyla Brace, president of CCHF, with today's Health Freedom Minute.
The computer in your doctor's office is not like the handy smartphone in your pocket. It's a hindrance to patient care. Hassles include drop-down menus, countless boxes to check, and pages to navigate. The screen often freezes. It takes 7 clicks to order basic antibiotics, 14 clicks to order stronger ones, and it's death by 1,000 clicks, 2 doctors write in the Wall Street Journal. And it's killing the medical profession. 2/3 of their workday is spent tending to digital paperwork instead of patients. Is this what Democrats wanted when they mandated these systems? Is this what Republicans want when they demand ever more data reporting through these systems? Think about it.
Learn more about protecting your healthcare choices. Sign up for the CCHF Weekly E-News Update at cchfreedom.org. That's cchfreedom.org.
The following is not an actor, but a real-life story from Trinity Debt Management.
I had a lot of credit card debt and I couldn't pay my bills. I was feeling so bad. I got to a point where I needed some help. So I reached out and contacted Trinity.
If you're in debt and you need help, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813 to talk to a certified counselor.
They were able to take all of my different payments and put them all together.
Trinity will consolidate your accounts into one easy-to-manage monthly payment, put a stop to late fees and over-limit charges, reduce your interest, and possibly improve your credit score. You'll save thousands.
And they were actually able to work with my creditors. I've been able to pay off close to $15,000 in the last 18 months.
If your debt has you down, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813.
My name is Stephanie, and I'm debt-free for keeps.
1-800-788-1813.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to Focal Point. Brian Fisher is my name. Program is Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio. Also the home of high-octane, ethanol-free radio. Nothing but high-energy, high-powered jet propulsion fuel on board this baby. Glad to have you in the conversation. I want to finish up my thoughts on why I am a Christian. I mentioned at the beginning or at the end of the last segment that I'm a Christian primarily because of the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. And, part of the reason I believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead is there's no alternative explanation for the absence of his body from the grave that makes any sense. His own followers wouldn't have stolen his body, because that means they would have known that the whole thing was a lie. And people will die for a lie that they believe is true, but they're not going to die for a lie that they know is a lie. So that's not a credible explanation for his body being absent from the tomb. Now, a second thing I think is important to me is that his resurrection was confirmed by abundant eyewitness testimony. Remember, there were the women that came to the grave on Easter morning. There were 2 travelers on the road to Emmaus. There were all the apostles on Easter evening besides Thomas. A week later, they were gathered again in the upper room. Thomas was with them. And Thomas had the opportunity, doubting Thomas, to physically examine Christ's wounds with his own hands and his own eyes, and he fell at the feet of Jesus, calling out, "My Lord and my God." Then after this, we know that Jesus was seen alive after he died by well over 500 eyewitnesses. Now realize what this means. Far more people saw Christ alive with their own eyes than saw John Kennedy dead. But nobody doubts that John Kennedy actually died because too many people saw him die. The people in the emergency room, the people that handled his body for transport, the people that did the autopsy when they got back to Bethesda Medical Center back in Washington, D.C. Their testimony was unanimous regarding the fact of his death. Small number of eyewitnesses, but nobody has doubted their eyewitness testimony to this day. So the same kind of eyewitness testimony that makes us believe that John F. Kennedy died is the same kind of eyewitness testimony that confirms that Jesus Christ was alive, that he rose from the dead. Now, if the Jews or the Romans had stolen the body and the story of the resurrection started seeping out, they just would have produced the body to show that there was nothing to it. And some people think, well, they just wanted it to be true so badly that they just imagined that it had happened. But if you read the resurrection accounts carefully, you realize that every one of the followers of Christ had to be convinced against their will that Christ had risen from the dead. They all believed that he was dead, believed that he was buried, believed that it was over. You know, when they came to the tomb on Sunday morning, when the women came to the tomb, it wasn't to greet him as a resurrected Savior. It was to finish embalming his body for burial. So they weren't expecting it. It was the last thing they expected. They had to be convinced against their will. Now, here's the takeaway for me. You know, the enemies of the cross, enemies of Christianity, our enemies, our adversaries in the public sphere, say that our faith as Christians, is some kind of purely subjective leap into a fact-free, evidence-free abyss. But ladies and gentlemen, it's not. My faith in Christ is firmly rooted in the stubborn historical fact of the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. That means that the beauty of our Christian faith is that we do not need to check our brains at the door to be a sincerely devoted follower of Jesus Christ. In fact, a man must check his brain at the door not to believe in the resurrection of Christ because of overwhelming eyewitness testimony and the absence of any other rational explanation for the empty tomb. So our faith, ladies and gentlemen, is grounded in history, in fact, and in truth. You know, Carl Sagan one time said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The good news is that we can be quite settled in our own minds and in our own hearts that that standard has been met with regard to the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. John Adams famously said, facts are stubborn things. And he was right, which is precisely why my faith in Christ is stubborn, it is unbending, and it is unyielding. Column, Why I Am a Christian, up at afa.net. Encourage you to go there and to read it. Let's get into some sound bites here. Let's grab clip number 5 if we can. Rob, we've had this in the inventory for a little while, but it's a guy named John Avion. He's the senior editor of Daily Beast, which is an uber left-wing website. And you know, it's interesting. We're seeing with regard to the way the Stormy Daniels episode has been treated by the media, you know, I was surprised at how aggressive and hostile some of the questioning was of her attorney by people on Morning Joe, by people on The View. They were giving him a hard time. In other words, they found problems believing his story, believing her story. So these are people that are not inclined to give Donald Trump any credit whatsoever, but they sort of had to think, well, maybe, you know, maybe his version of this thing is a lot more credible than her version. All kinds of problems with her version. Now, here is John Avion, and he's a left-winger, but he wants to give Donald Trump credit for his actions against Russia. Remember, he bounced 60 diplomats. They're gone. They're out of the country, shutting down a consulate. And John Avion, left-winger, says this is good, gives Trump credit. Let's listen.
The Trump team deserves credit for this. This is tough, substantive action against Russia as part of a multilateral coalition to punish them for poisoning folks on foreign soil. That is a good step forward. And it's 3 times the number of diplomats that Britain expelled who had it happen, almost. So this is big, and it deserves credit.
It's big, and it deserves credit. The Trump team deserves credit for this tough, substantive action. Rare praise indeed from somebody on the left. Now I want to play 3 clips here. May have to go into the next segment with them, but these all have to do with Trump and the issue of faith. Let's start with clip number 6. This is a guy by the name of Bakari Sellers on CNN. The program is The Lead. He's the network political commentator for CNN. And he's when he gave this quote, he was in South Carolina. But again, he's talking here about the evangelicals and their response to Donald Trump, why they're still sticking with him. Here's what he had to say.
I sit here in South Carolina, the bastion of evangelicalism and Christianity, and all of these voters, they just turned a blind eye to Donald Trump and his behavior. I mean, it amazes me that white evangelicals, specifically white male evangelicals in the South, seem to not care. Like, they have the courage to stand up against Barack Obama wearing a tan suit or him wanting Dijon mustard, but let Barack Obama run around with, cheat on his wife. First of all, he probably would have been dead because Michelle would have killed him. But second, let him say that he wanted to be president of the United States of America. White evangelical men would have marched to the White House like the March on Washington. I mean, it would have been amazing to see how angry they could get. And now they are silent as church mice. So no, his support's not going to go anywhere because we're seeing the cowardice of our country shown through.
So he's laying it all off to cowardice. White evangelicals are too cowardly to do anything other than turn a blind eye to Donald Trump. Well, I know, speaking as a white evangelical, I have not. We've talked about it on this program before. I believe that Donald Trump did have this liaison with Stormy Daniels. There's no reason he'd pay $130,000 to keep her quiet if it didn't happen. And I'm perfectly willing to call what he did perfectly reprehensible. I've never pretended anything other than that. I've never tried to whitewash it, never tried to minimize it, never tried to justify it. What he did was tawdry, and it was shameful what he did. That's not exactly turning a blind eye to his misdeeds. But, you know, you go beyond that. Okay, so what do we do now? Let's assume that what he did was tawdry. What are we going to do now? He's going to be president for the next 3 years. Are we going to penalize America by opposing good policies he brings forward just because 12 years ago he did something tawdry? To me, that would simply be foolish and foolhardy to do that. Now, here is Michael Gerson, clip number 7. He is a pseudo-conservative, and he is talking here about what he thinks of white evangelicals that have not turned on Donald Trump but have kind of stuck by him. Listen to the term he uses to describe us. Clip 7.
Well, I think that it's the height of hypocrisy, and we saw it with Roy Moore as well. If any other Democratic president had been guilty of what is alleged in these cases, evangelicals would be, off the reservation. This is a case where their morality seems to be determined by their politics, and they've ceased to be moral leaders in that sense. It was a tough choice for many evangelicals between Hillary Clinton and the president, and I understand that. But they have been the most sycophantic element of the Republican coalition, which is unnecessary. They have not provided that moral judgment that I think leavens our politics, or should leaven our politics. And so, I've done this piece in The Atlantic, essentially arguing that they're betraying a great tradition. Evangelicalism really has had a good tradition, and now they're really undermining that reputation of their faith.
But in that judgment, you're saying the transactional part of this relationship isn't worth the trade-off?
Well, they're acting like, slimy political operatives, not moral leaders. They're essentially saying in order to get benefits for themselves in a certain way, they talk about religious liberty and other issues, but to get benefits for themselves, they're willing to wink at Stormy Daniels and wink at misogyny and wink at nativism. And that, I think, is deeply discrediting, not just in a political sense, but actually in a moral and religious sense.
It's hard to know where to start with this guy and what he says here, this Michael Gerson. He refers to Roy Moore and the hypocrisy involved in the Republican Party. Well, number one, Republicans landed on Roy Moore like a falling safe. Don't forget Mitch McConnell wouldn't give him any help. Virtually every Republican, every conservative commentator that I read believed these outlandish allegations against Roy Moore. No foundation for them, no substantiation for them. Everyone on a closer examination of the stories, the accusations just completely fell apart. We covered them in extensive detail at the time. I'm not going to rehash all of that. but there wasn't any one of the allegations against Roy Moore that was credible. But I've talked to people since, my extended family and other places, that believed all those things. Apparently they never heard the truth behind some of their stories, the things that poked holes in their stories. And so Roy Moore just didn't get a fair shot. I was one of the few people that stuck with Roy Moore right to the very end because I did not believe these allegations from the beginning. And then when I started getting more information about the truth behind those allegations, even confirmed even more deeply that there is nothing here. And I want to say one more thing when we come back. They were not slimy political operatives looking for something for themselves. They were looking for something for the country.
Hi, this is Steve Tiber with 8 Days of Hope. We've seen God open up so many doors for us to help serve and love those who get affected by a natural disaster.
As the trees and the wind started crashing down around us, my wife was, of course, very diligently praying, Lord, please be with us.
Very simply, we do it because God commands us to love others.
I see these volunteers all as a gift from God.
And I'm just grateful they're here, helping out. It's a blessing.
If you're interested in becoming a part of what God's doing through 8 Days of Hope, please go to 8daysofhope.com, click on Get Involved, submit your email address.
I've noticed that whenever there's a time in my life when things might be a little gloomy, the number one thing that I can do is to go serve somebody.
And I would encourage anyone else to, it's worth it. Come out and do it next time if you did make it to this one, and the Father will really bless you in it.
Thank you so much for your prayers and volunteering with 8 Days of Hope.
I would like to give a hearty thumbs up and thank Abraham Hamilton III for his spot-on show called The Hamilton Corner. It is intelligent, well-researched. It's a counterpoint to the mainstream propaganda.
I just want to give a shout-out to Abraham Hamilton III. Brother, you are a breath of fresh air, especially during the time slot that I listen to you on my way home from work.
Hi, this is Abraham Hamilton III, and it really blows me away to hear how God is using the Hamilton Corner and all the other programs on American Family Radio. He's doing an amazing work here. That's why I'm glad to have an opportunity to ask you to partner with us financially during our 3-day share-a-thon starting Tuesday, April 17th.
God bless you. Keep up the good work.
Hamilton, keep on doing what you are doing. It's much appreciated.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. Video segments of today's program will be posted at afr.net and on the Focal Point Facebook page. You'll also find the best collection of Brian's resources on our Facebook page. If you're on Twitter, be among the very first every morning to find out what the day's show will be about. Just follow Brian at Brian J. Fisher. Brian J. Fisher.
Howdy. Brian Fisher is my name. Program Focal Point, Network American Family Radio. It's Free for All Friday on Thursday.
We should do them every day.
Yeah, have Free for All.
Yeah, just
Friday,
put you in a better
mood.
Our listeners will probably agree to that.
Yeah,
every day is a Friday.
It's got kind of a lighter feel to it when we're heading toward Free for All Friday.
Jeff, I noticed you were reeling him in.
Yeah.
There's no way. You know that.
No reeling me in.
There's no reeling that guy in.
Free for All Friday. Anyway, I just want to go back to what Michael Gerson said, his criticism of us as evangelicals being guilty of the height of hypocrisy, and mentioned Roy Moore as an example. That's ridiculous because they just blasted him. There was nobody defending Roy Moore in the Republican Party. That was the problem. He should have been defended, and he wasn't. So that's a weird thing about it. They accepted these allegations that he was a child molester, and they dumped him. They ditched him. So I don't understand where Michael Gerson is coming from. If he was looking for white evangelicals that did what their values teach them to do, well, they believed that Roy Moore was guilty of molesting children, so they dumped him, which they should have done if he'd done it, which he didn't do. But the other thing, it seems to me, is misguided here, is he's arguing that these white evangelicals they've abandoned and betrayed their tradition because in order to get something for themselves, he said this twice, to get benefits for themselves, they're willing to wink at Stormy Daniels and wink at misogyny, as if these white evangelicals are just in this for what they can get out of it, to say they had a conversation with the president or they prayed with the president or whatever. And you can understand how some of that would be appealing, and you'd love to be able to tell those kind of stories. But that is not what is motivating white evangelicals in America. We're concerned about our country. We're concerned about religious liberty. We're concerned about what's happening to the family. We're concerned about the sexual values that are being enshrined and defended in this country. And that's why we finally got somebody in the White House now that's actually willing to fight for some of the values that we find very, very important, like this ruling on transgenders in the military. That's important to us for two reasons, both because we believe in a strong military, first, and secondly, inviting transgenders into the military will weaken it. We do not want anything to weaken the recruitment in the military, the unit cohesion in the military, and the military readiness of our military. We don't want anything to get in the way of that. We need a smooth operating fighting machine that is willing to administer lethal force where it's necessary to protect our freedom. And transgenders don't help with that. They hurt that. They impinge on that. So we don't want anything to be embraced in the military that would weaken its ability to do its job and carry out its mission. So this is not about us getting benefits for ourselves. This is about seeing things that are good for the country are coming out of the White House. So I just reject that accusation that we are slimy political operatives, anything but. In fact, here's Darrell Scott, clip number 1. He is a African-American pastor who's been a strong supporter of Donald Trump, and he's on with Brooke Baldwin on CNN, and he is defending Trump. And I think, he's talking about the fact that, look, this happened 12 years ago. And the point is that people change. And he makes a good point here I think we all need to keep in mind. Let's listen.
I support the White House statement that it didn't happen. Now, I support the president that he is now. Evangelicals support the president that he is now more so than the businessman that he was 12 years ago. And I really believe his present presidential merits outweigh his past personal demerits. And so, I don't find it difficult. He's not the same person that he was 12 years ago. I'm not the same person I was 12 years ago. You're not the same person you were 12 years ago. And so to try to drag up a porn star who says she had a one-night stand with a billionaire 12 years ago and try to give her a voice of morality in America, that's what I find to be preposterous.
It's interesting. You think about where you were 12 years ago. And
I don't want to.
No.
And whether, think about where you were then, and would you be qualified at that time for the position you have today if you're in ministry, you're doing something productive or fruitful for the kingdom? Would you have been ready to be hired at that time? Well, if you're in that position, it's because you've changed. You're not the same person that you were 12 years ago, and that's why you can be useful for kingdom business. And I think whatever is true of the president, I think it's clear that he's not the same person that he was 12 years ago. I don't know exactly where he's at spiritually, whether he is a full-fledged follower of Jesus Christ. I'm waiting to hear those words coming from his mouth, because remember, Romans 10 says that if you confess with your mouth, believe in your heart that Christ rose from the dead, and you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and he has acknowledged that Jesus is Lord in some public events, not speaking personally, but speaking generally, so he has acknowledged the Lordship of Christ. Love to hear him do that with words that come out of his own mouth about his personal faith in Christ. So anyway, people change, and you don't want to hold what somebody did 12 years ago against them for the rest of their lives. There's nothing fair. There's nothing just about that. So anyway, we'll see how all that plays out as we go forward. Now, one other soundbite I want to play before we're done, then we'll take your calls in the last segment. This is clip number 4. This is something that we have talked about frequently on this program, and that is kind of what we're running into with the way the whole issue of the relationship between the sexes is being handled, feminism and what it does, how we understand the role of men in our culture, the role of women in our culture. And, right now we're at a very dangerous phase or place in our culture where men are being demonized for being men. They're not demonized for being bad men. They're not demonized for being immoral men. They're being demonized for being men. And it's not an exact parallel, but, we put a lot of people, a lot of young boys on Ritalin who are just being normal, healthy, active boys, doing what boys at their age do, and we kind of demonize them and hook them up with Ritalin because our whole education system is set up for the way that girls learn, sit quietly in rows and do work, not for the way boys learn. They're active. They got ants in their pants. It's hard for them to sit still for that long. But here is Tucker Carlson talking about exactly that same problem. Clip 4. Let's listen.
The most remarkable fact about the decline of men in America is how relentlessly our leaders pretend it's not happening at all. The patriarchy is thriving, they tell us. Men are in charge, and they succeed precisely to the extent they thwart the progress of women. Society is a zero-sum equation in which a man's gain is a woman's loss. This is wrong, and we must rectify it. That's the message. It's widely understood that attacking people for their basic nature is unhealthy, and it's wrong. A government-funded program designed to fight toxic femininity or toxic homosexuality probably would not escape the scrutiny of Congress or the media. At the very least, its supporters would have to explain why our country needs a program like that. And yet nobody has been forced to explain why boys, who are already failing, need to be held back further. And so they are.
You know, and you look at the imbalance, what he talks about, we wouldn't even think about having a men's studies program in universities, but we need those as badly as we need women's studies programs. In fact, I would say we need them more. We need to put more energy and investment into helping our young boys grow into full-fledged men, to mature, strong, courageous, bold men who are protectors and who are providers for their families. Instead, we are hammering them for being men. They exercise any kind of masculine strength. We accuse them of being misogynistic, of being bullies, of throwing their weight around as men, all that kind of stuff. And so they become very timid because they get punished when they act like the men that God has designed them to be. Now, a couple of other things on the religious liberty front as we head into the section of phone calls. This is a cool story out of Spain. All of the flags in Spain are flying at half-mast this weekend until Sunday morning at 12:01 a.m. to honor the death of Christ. Oh, so wow. The flags in Spain are going at half-mast today at 2 p.m. Spanish time on all military buildings, be that way through the weekend, Thursday, the rest of Thursday, all day Friday, all day Saturday, until Sunday morning, which is the day of resurrection, when they'll be raised again to full mast. Full mast. All units, barracks, and bases. Tradition commemorates the Last Supper and Jesus' washing of the disciples' feet. Will last till 12:01 a.m. on Christmas morning. Now, here's kind of a shocker. Well, let me touch on this story first. This is just bizarre. I mean, it just shows you how obsessed we are with this environmental lunacy. This is a story in religionnews.com. How might Easter be reinterpreted in light of climate change? This is paragraph number 5. If you ask the average American Christian what Easter is all about, they'll probably tell you something like this. God sent Jesus to die and rise again to save human beings from their sins. If humans accept Jesus' sacrifice, they get to heaven when they get to go to heaven when they die. That's pretty good, isn't it? That's right exactly on the money. The emphasis is on human beings, the progeny of Adam and Eve, and that is the problem, this writer says, of our view of Easter. It's all about saving men instead of saving animals and the earth, and that's how we need to reinterpret Easter. It was easy to believe this version of the story, he says, when humans thought they were the very center of the young universe. It's harder to accept that story now. Our very old species is just one of millions crawling across a small planet, spinning in a tiny section of a huge universe. We don't play the starring role in the universe that our ancestors believed we did. The problem is many of us still act as if we're starring in that role. Such anthropocentrism has had negative effects on our planet. Over the past 130 years, for example, the global temperature has increased 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit. Carbon dioxide, the force behind global warming, that is just a bald-faced, flat-out lie, is higher than it's been in the past 400,000 years. I don't even think that's correct. Number one, the Earth's not even 400,000 years old. But again, some climate experts believe that if this trend isn't corrected, if we don't take our eyes off of man and we don't start making the earth and the animal kingdom the center of the universe, Earth's surface temperature could be 8 degrees warmer by the year 2100. He goes on, who is my neighbor? Someone once asked Jesus. The answer, a fellow human being. But, as theologian Elizabeth Johnson points out, your neighbor, listen to this, your neighbor is also that whale and that bumblebee and that ocean and that supernova. You might be wondering what any of this has to do with Easter, and the answer is everything. So that's where you got Easter all wrong, ladies and gentlemen. You think it's about saving man from sin. It's not. It's about saving the whales and the bumblebees. Back in 2.
Hi, this is Dan Celia from Financial Issues. We as God's people need to be good stewards of all that He has given us. That is so important, and that's what drives me each day as I break down the latest financial numbers and talk to listeners across the country about their use of the money that God has entrusted to them. Join me each morning from 8 to 10 Central and Saturday mornings at 10 o'clock Central Time for Financial Issues right here on American Family Radio.
For well over a century, secular progressives in the United States have worked to alter the very nature of our republic.
Progressives had no problem with saying we can leave the Declaration of Independence behind. For the progressives, there are no longer any God-given natural rights.
AFA Executive Vice President Ed Vitagliano helps you understand the progressive threat to the American Republic. Get your copy of this powerful DVD from the AFA Cultural Institute at afastore.net.
Today, moral relativism and political correctness are assaulting truth. How can the world have hope when believers themselves aren't clear on the authority of the Bible?
The Church of Jesus Christ always faces a tremendous temptation to deviate from the Word of God.
The God who speaks clearly expresses God's intent in giving us His Word and the response that is demanded of those who hear.
Nobody ever encounters God and says, that was boring and irrelevant. When people say that about the Bible, it just says to me they've not encountered the God of the Bible.
Our faith is rooted in history, and consequently we need to use the evidence and never be afraid of it.
The God Who Speaks is a feature-length documentary from the American Family Association, which could bolster your confidence in the Word of God.
Churches really need to see this, really need to understand what the Bible actually is.
Available now at thegodwhospeaks.org.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. Focal Point. Brian Fisher.
Welcome back to the last segment of today's edition of Focal Point on American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. We'll take your calls in this segment. Free for all Thursday. Talk about anything that's been in the news this past week. So you can write your own script, 888-589-8840. Talk about anything that's on your mind as long as it's been in the news over the course of this past week. Now, I do want to say one thing about our last topic. I had this writer complaining that the problem with the way Christians understand Easter today is it's too anthropocentric. It's all centered about man. It's as if Easter is all about Christ dying for the sins of man. And she's saying that's wrong. That's bad. That we need to be geocentric when we think about Easter. That Christ came not to save man from his sins, but to save the earth. Well, who's it going to save the earth from? The way liberals think about it, save the earth from man. But here's the thing here's the point I want to make. Christ did not come to die for the sins of the earth. He came to die for the sins of man. Easter is a very anthropocentric celebration, event. But here's the thing I want you not to forget. If you go to Romans chapter 8, Paul makes it clear that the destiny of the environment, the destiny of the world, is wrapped up in the destiny of the sons of God. Because when we are redeemed in full, we are going to redeem the earth along with us. It's going to be redeemed. It'll be brought up to what it's supposed to be, trailing along behind us. God will redeem the earth as He redeems man. This is what Paul says in Romans 8. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation, that's the earth, waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God, for the creation, the earth, was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our body. So the promise is that when we are redeemed, when the fullness of our redemption comes, we get our new bodies, God is also going to redeem the earth along with us, and it will be released from its futility. All right, well, let's go to the phones. 888-589-8840 is the number. 888-589-8840. Let's grab a call from Matt in Arkansas to start this segment. Matt, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hey, Brian, this is Matt. Hey, listen, first off, I love your show, and there's just so many things to talk about. But, you know, I was in the Marine Corps, and fortunately I was in during peacetime in the late 70s, early 80s. And, you know, I would hate to be in a foxhole during a war zone and have a homosexual, you know, they're God's created, and his lover being in another foxhole. We're in a war zone, and they're fighting against each other, and then he turns around and ends up shooting at that guy and hitting me, and then the enemy, here they come, they run us over simply because we're fighting against ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a dangerous situation, so that's a practicality. It's not just, you know, the things you've been talking about, which is absolutely spot on, but my goodness, you know, lovers, I've seen it. I've seen lovers fight each other, and they're vicious when they're mad at each other.
Well, you know, that's true, and the rate of domestic violence in homosexual relationships is about 4 times the rate of the domestic violence in married relationships. 400% more frequent in homosexual relationships that there's domestic violence and assault and those kind of things. You do not need that dynamic in the military. You don't need it there. So it's clearly a threat to unit cohesion when you got that kind of stuff going. You know, and Matt, also, here's the other thing. You know, we had a call the other day from someone who says, look, in the military, a lot of times you're in very close quarters with your comrades in arms. I mean, you're sharing really tight spaces with each other. You're crammed in together for whatever reasons. And the last thing, and I'll ask you to respond to this, Matt, the last thing you want to be worried about is whether the guy that's sharing your tent or your berth on a submarine has got his eyes on you and wants to make a move on you. You talk about an impact on unit cohesion, that would shoot that right out of the tub.
That's scary.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, Matt, I appreciate the call. And so there are a lot of reasons, you know, Matt talking about reasons that it's not a good idea to have homosexuals in the military. You know, a lot of the same arguments have to do with transgenders, and they fortunately, wiser heads have prevailed in the military. Donald Trump has said only under limited circumstances will they be allowed to serve. You know, I've got another article in my stack today. Won't take time to go through it, but it's an article talking about how kind of the issue of homosexuality in public service, that issue has been settled and we've lost. But now it's not a big deal for somebody to be a homosexual and be promoted to a very visible position. You know, a number of years ago, when Mitt Romney wanted to appoint Richard Grinnell to be his spokesman for international affairs, we in the pro-family community stopped that. I started that by sending a tweet out that if personnel is policy, this is not a good sign for the pro-family movement under a President Romney. And that took on some energy, took on some life. Other pro-life and pro-family voices jumped in, and Mitt Romney was forced to withdraw his nomination. Now President Trump has nominated him to be ambassador to Germany, which is one of the major ambassadorial posts, and there just isn't there's just no pushback against that. So again, the point the author is making is the pro-family community is kind of rolled over on this issue of sexual behavior and its fitness for public office. All right, let's go to Mike in Virginia. Mike, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hi, how you doing, Brian?
Good.
The But you're talking about way too much today. You got my mind going 1,000 miles an hour. But point one, I'll make 2 points. I'll use brevity, something that's tough for me. But first point is that we're actually, with those snippets you were playing with the liberals trying to utilize the Bible, utilize the scriptures. I mean, Christendom itself has a barely a firm grasp on it. Those guys, they have no room using scriptures to try to shame us into anything. And they certainly did. Actually, they complimented us by saying that they recognize we have a standard because we recognize those reprobates don't. So maybe if we acted like them, we'd have no problems in the political realm. But I'm not suggesting we do that. But my main point is that this whole gun brouhaha. It's interesting they have all these ideas about how they'd like to, stupid things like completely ban them, confiscate, stuff like that. But clearly, they're not thinking clearly, because do you think there won't be any backlash I know there will be at one household in Virginia. It isn't going to be clean. So why did they even make ridiculous statements like that? I mean, are they trying to test us to find out what we would do? But note, the conservatives, the patriots, people like that, we don't need to rise up and do anything stupid. We're calm people until blood is drawn. And then it's done.
Well, and I agree with you, Mike, and I think that's why it'll never happen, because the American people simply will not stand for it. We just will not stand for it. And that means that they know, this is why it won't go anywhere, is they know is if they actually sent people to our homes to confiscate our guns, there's going to be some severe pushback that might even involve the use of arms to protect ourselves in our own homes. It's just not going to happen, and they know that. That's why I think it's all bluster on their part. They would love to do it. They've tipped their hands on this deal. John Paul Stevens, Supreme Court Justice, that's what we need to do, repeal the Second Amendment so we can take guns away from people. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, let's play that clip real fast, Rob. Debbie Wasserman Schultz wants us to get background checks for ammunition purchases.
Unlike firearms purchases, someone who wants to go into a store that sells ammunition, this is just such a gaping and grave and dangerous loophole that I could not wrap my mind around it when I was told that that was the case.
So got to get background checks to buy ammunition. So, we talked about the fact they'll come incrementally. Well, this is where they're going to start. Maybe they'll start with the ammunition. Confiscate the ammunition. Your gun's no good unless you got ammunition to fire it. Then they'll come after the assault rifles. Then they'll come after semi-automatic weapons, which is basically every pistol that's used in America. And pretty soon, if we're not paying attention, they will start encroaching on the Second Amendment. All right, thank you, Mike. That's an excellent call. Let's go to Richard in Bluffton, Ohio. Richard, welcome. What's on your mind?
Yes, Brian. First of all, I want to thank you for giving us, this normal person, an explanation of the news and finding out what the truth is, not only being a sounding board for us, for this slow thinker, but I think providing it for a whole lot of people out there that they don't know who to believe, and they know that they can't believe much of what they hear on the news and airways. Again, I want to thank you for that. It's very much appreciated.
You're very welcome.
Next, I would like to, and I don't agree with you hardly ever, but you said that global warming was the largest hoax. I have to think that it's only part of the largest hoax. The most diabolical and deceiving deception since Adam and Eve has surfaced here and now, right now. It's the consummate of all the lies being spread by billionaires and 99% of the airwaves, the internet, and the news media. That very, very prominent people are being deceived, and they cannot believe they are being deceived. We have very prominent people out there that only get their news through NBC, ABC, and CBS, and they can't believe that they're not telling them the truth, and they are being deceived.
Yeah.
And it's appalling.
Yeah. Well, and it's true. If they only listen to those sources, they are going to be fooled. They are going to be deceived. They're going to think that global warming is a crisis, that the planet is in danger of incinerating. I'm looking at a story here, Climate Depot. 40 scientific papers confirm that nothing climatically unusual is happening. 40 scientific papers, nothing unusual is happening with the climate. Well, that's it for today. Don't forget to worship Christ this Easter. Thank God for the resurrection. See you back here on Monday.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
You can stay up to date with the latest in the culture war from the news team at onenewsnow.com. Our goal is to present the day's news from a biblical perspective. OneNewsNow.com not only features the latest breaking stories from across the U.S. and around the world, but also news of the challenges that Christians face today. Bookmark OneNewsNow.com.
Faith,